The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Nick Zulovich, Senior Editor of Subprime Auto Finance News, part of the team at Cherokee Media Group. In today's webinar, Millennials, Sell Them on the Experience, we're going to learn more from Jason Berry, who is the Associate Vice President of Market Performance for DealerTrack F&I and VIN Solutions, Cox Automotive Company. But before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. Please make sure you've dialed in using the phone number provided in your communication email, or you're able to listen via your PC speakers. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll make a link to that recording available to you as soon as possible after our session. So watch your inbox for a link to the webinar recording. You will be in listen-only mode for this webinar, but we will reserve some time after Jason's presentation for a Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any time using the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And if we aren't able to get to your question today, don't worry, because we'll forward it on to Jason and the team at DealerTrack F&I so they can respond to you directly via email. And lastly, if you have any difficulty during the webinar, please click on the hand icon on the GoToWebinar control panel to alert a member of our webinar team. So with years of experience and plenty of data and information to share, let's get right to Jason Berry for our webinar. Jason, the floor is now yours.
Great. Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it. And thanks for having me, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. And Nick's been a great friend for years, just in the 12-something years I've been in the auto retail business. And they're great publications, great outlets, so we're great to partner here to bring this content for you. And just excited is we've got another great partner with us. We've got Kevin Cook from Straub Automotive in West Virginia, who's going to join me and provide some great perspective on his dealerships and what they're doing to effectively engage with millennials. So let's get right to it. So yeah, millennials have been such an amazing fascination in a lot of industries, consumer packaged goods, and the automotive industry as well. And I remember I gave my first presentation around this generation back in 2013, and that's when a lot of analysts, whether it was on Wall Street or folks in our industry, that were thinking that this younger generation, it would bring forth the end of the car era, right? It was they're not going to buy cars, they're not going to be in the market, they're living at home with their parents, and they're going to be driving their parents' cars. And really, much has changed since the last 3 to 4 years on expectations of car shopping. And part of what we're going to do here in the next half an hour or so is give you some really good data and insight, give you some perspective on trends, on some formal market research that we've done, and give you a perspective of what I'm seeing from DealerTrack and VIN Solutions and Cox Automotive, and Kevin's perspective from the retail side as well. So with that, let's get right into it. So some baseline points, right? Just so we're all clear on some facts. We think about the millennials and this generation of folks. 75.4 million individuals in this generation compared to the baby boomers of 74.9. This is the largest generation in the history of our country. That you also think about framing up about this generation. This is a lot on the slide, but think about the columns here. And think about what influences each generation. And think about the millennials specifically and the rise of smartphones and that influencing power around millennials. And think about some of the more impactful events that really drove the behavioral changes of this generation, specifically, what the media has called the Great Recession, right, of 2008 and 2009. And a lot of these influences have very much shaped the buying habits of millennials. So if we think about where millennials started graduating from college in the early 2000s, those previously employed, they fell hard on times after '08. Young graduates struggled to find employment, right? You think about trying to pay back college loans, and a pretty intense stat if you think about it. This generation has about 1.3 trillion, that's with a T, in total student loans. So they're very much influenced based upon the financial impact that they've experienced. And that's all bled into how they've lived, right? And we're talking in generalities here, of course, right? So based upon the stats, 42% of millennials are married compared to prior generations. And the silent generation, remember, those are in the much younger generation, pre-baby boomer, when they were 25 to 35 at 82%, as an example. So we've got a poll question here. Nick, you wanna kick that off for the audience to participate?
Yeah, I think we kind of stole a little bit of the thunder there from the poll question. So again,
there you go. That's it. So I lose a point in the technology savviness of our system. So sorry about that. So if we don't get everyone marking the right term, we know you're really not paying attention. So we could keep moving here, but yeah, you think about the influence power and the impact on culturally this generation. Some other specific areas, the influencing of home ownership, right? And 37% of millennials are owning homes compared to baby boomers of 56%. We think about children in household with 44% compared to 50%. So it's a very different mix of individuals, how they live, how they perceive society, and how they're buying at the same time as well. And those buying behaviors are specific in the automotive industry. So let's now, again, we're going to pivot here a bit, talk a little bit about those buying patterns, what their socio-demographic shifts have been. Now let's get into the auto industry specifically. So one reality that exists, it's a fact, right? We get this information from a lot of different sources, that there's a declining proportion of the population that has driver's licenses. And for members of this generation, that's continued to decline over the last 15 years. And much of this can be attributed to a lot of different things, right? You think about people moving to cities, a lot of traffic and congestion, improved overall traffic systems. I guess it depends where you're from. In New York City right now, we're struggling with some issues on public transportation, but overall, infrastructure has improved in a lot of urban areas, really driving consumers to necessarily need a car and a driver's license. Now, but something that's really interesting here that we looked at in the data was about 4 years ago. And at that time, about 50% of young millennials, those are folks 18 to 24 at the time, they didn't own a car. And when asked why, 83% told us that they couldn't afford a vehicle. Pretty interesting. And of that group, even more interesting, 73% intended to purchase a vehicle in the near future. So, while everyone thought the sky was going to fall, right, and this whole generation was done with owning cars, we knew that the generation, indeed, there was going to be pent-up demand. We knew that they would want to own vehicles. It was just simply, at that point in their lives, they weren't in a position. So when it comes to new cars specifically, they've become a growing segment in the market. It accounted for nearly 1 out of 3 car sales in 2016. Pretty cool stat that our research team came up with was in California, which is the country's #1 car market, millennials outpaced baby boomers for the first time. So I believe we have another poll question. I am not going to screw this one up. So Nick, why don't you jump in here?
And now it's up on the screen. So where new car sales associated with millennials, where would they go in the next 3 years?
All right, 40%. There we go. Right. So Yeah, so good stuff. That's right, spot on, exactly where we're at. And listen, this is going back to the overall trend that we're seeing in the industry of the mix of new and used vehicles. And we all know how important used vehicle sales are to our overall profitability, right? And that important mix specifically for those franchise dealerships, obviously, and on this call. So a pretty interesting trend there. So let me kind of dig a little bit deeper now on the Dealertrack Credit App Network data. And most of you hopefully are on the Dealertrack Credit Application Network to work with your lenders. And at an aggregate, some pretty interesting trends that we're seeing that millennials now account for a significant share of the overall lending market, of 36% now compared to 2011, which is 25%. And that continues to grow. So again, another indicator that they're in the market, and they're in the market to buy and finance as well, which is a nice segue. Later in this presentation, we're going to talk about the F&I process and F&I workflow specifically for millennials. And something, again, we think about the spectrum here of millennials and where they fall, that the credit mix has remained fairly stable in the last 4 to 5 years, with about 40% of loan submissions falling into the subprime category. And I know Kevin, I introduced him before. He's got some pretty good perspective and insight at his stores when it comes to subprime and millennials. Kev, you have a couple of minutes? And
sure, happy to.
Yep.
Yeah, when we took a look at this stat, it's kind of frightening to know that almost 50% of our market and our growing market is subprime, because as we all know, once we put someone in that subprime category, it's very, very difficult to get them out over time. Because what we're trying to do, I know in our store is, we're shooting for about a 30 to 35% lease customer in order to have that customer coming back to us, approximately every 30 months. And if we're going to put 40% of our customers into subprime, these millennials, then that makes it very, very difficult for us to continue down the path we're on. And so one of the things that we really, really try to do here is we work a little harder at getting them to obtain a cosigner, work a little harder at getting them to come with the down payment, rather than just taking that path of least resistance and just immediately put them in that subprime category.
Now, good perspective. Thank you. And you're right. It's about the long-term relationship. How do we help you, as you're building your customer base, not just for today with ups coming through whether it's your website or into your physical showroom, but building up that pipeline for future buyers as well. Getting that yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's keep going here. So we're going to get into now how we think about not just the financing behavior and data points, but how millennials are actually researching vehicles differently. And Kev, you had some perspective on this as well, and I could follow up with some stats, but please share your perspective.
Sure. Yeah, as we all know, the almighty smartphone is taking over the world, and the millennial that where a lot of our customer base would, they would send an email in requesting information. What we've learned is, and what we're seeing, the trend, we're getting fewer and fewer email-related or internet-related requests, and through tracking our phone calls are going up exponentially over the past 2 to 3 years. So it's almost like the more things change, the more they stay the same. 20 years ago in this business, we had to be so skilled on the phone in order to set that appointment. And now we're finding that these millennials, they want that information now. They're not willing to wait for you to respond with an email. And texting is another thing that being able to provide that information instantly, and most importantly, good information, because they have done their research. They are very skilled online, and they do want someone that has the ability to give them the information they want.
Yeah, great perspective. Thank you. So right out of the gate, just a good learning here and a perspective. The most notable difference we see with millennials, they're far more likely to start the process with a budget in mind versus starting off what I'll call the whole process by building a consideration set and then figuring out what they could afford from there. So really what this is saying is it's about price sensitivity, and it comes down to monthly payment, right? And we all know, right, if everyone's worked a deal, right, you work the tower and you're talking with a customer, and it's one of the reasons why leasing is so popular right now, trending at about 30% of all retail deals at this point. That's a nationwide number across all brands. That what we're seeing here is the millennial group is very sensitive around monthly payments, and they're more focused on the instantaneous gratification, right? It's what's my out-of-pocket today versus being concerned about the broader cost of that vehicle. Much more compared to other generations, which are more savvy around. And I say savvy, that's my own perspective of about understanding the full impact financially of getting into that car. And given some of millennials or first-time shoppers, their consideration set overall is far larger than their other counterparts in their other areas as well. So let's connect the dots, right? If you think about new and used, right, the millennial is in a position that they're willing to look at both new and used cars. They're looking at options more aggressively for monthly payments. Naturally, what we're seeing is that it's taking longer for them to make decisions. So in market, we're seeing that millennials are about 15 days more than other generations, the Gen Xers there, to actually come to a decision to actually finalize and nail down the vehicle that they're going to proceed with. And before it's all said and done, they'll spend about 17 and a half hours of shopping, whether it's online or in store. And, it's not surprisingly exactly where Kevin was going. A good percent of that is actually time shopped online. And we've done a lot of research, obviously under the Cox Automotive organization with Dealer.com and Auto Trader and Kelley Blue Book. There's a lot of different resources that online that consumers are going, not just our properties, other third-party properties as well. But it's a shift in marketing dollars. I'm sure many of you are seeing this if you're working with your local regional associations or your state association. Many are seeing that trend as well. So we've talked a bit about the research phase. Let's pivot now and talk about what happens in the dealership, right? And how do millennials act differently compared to other generations? And out of the gate, what we see in the data and the research that we've conducted is that they spend about 3 hours at the dealership at the time of purchase, and it's slightly lower than their older counterparts. So let's connect the dots, the why behind that. They've done their research online, they're better prepared for a conversation because they don't have the patience necessarily, right? There's a lot of generalities around the why, but what we do know from the data, which is intriguing, is that the chart that you're seeing here shows the satisfaction level of car buyers, including millennials over time. And it clearly shows that consumer satisfaction drops after the initial 90 minutes. So it's where the frustration kicks in. And let me go here. There we go. And think about the millennials and their lower tolerance for what I'll define as process inefficiencies. So it's that idle time. It's the waiting around. It's waiting for paperwork to be processed, or they're waiting for the car to get pulled up for the test drive. It's really no surprise, right? They're walking away less satisfied with the dealership experience compared to their older generations. So now let's take a little bit of a closer look at the process. And I like this graphic because it tells a really good story. I define it as the roller coaster of the car buying experience. There's a lot of highs and there's a lot of lows. And highs, not surprising, right? It's when they're talking with an informed salesperson, they're starting off the process, that they're going through the test drive, right? Their adrenaline's pumping, and they take that delivery. Those are the peaks. And then the big valley is focused really in that area centered around F&I. And what we're seeing is that 28% of millennials are saying the process that they're least satisfied with that area. And not surprising, because what's happening there is there's a lot of information and data being presented that they're not necessarily familiar with, right? They want to become more comfortable with that information. And if you think about the key story and the headline around what do we do about that, overall, the pain that the customer sees and shows their frustration, that 25% of consumers are frustrated with the vehicle financing and F&I product side. What do we do? What could we do to react to that, and how could we better educate the consumer, not just millennials, but all consumers, to have a better experience and to reduce those pain points? So,
Jason, can I jump in here just a second?
Yeah, Kev, please.
We talk about the millennial. The one thing that they have already done before they get here is they've already made their buying decisions. So, or at least that's what we found, because as we know, that the traditional customer in the past that would shop 3 to 4 dealerships, now the customer is down to 1.2 dealerships that they're actually going to shop on average. And the millennial is the one that's driving that down, because they've done their research, they've spent more time online, they've picked the vehicle out they want, they've set their budget up, they have an idea of exactly what they want. And when they get here, they want this process to go very smoothly so they can satisfy, that desire. And to complete that transaction in a timely fashion is extremely important. And one of the things that we found is, using the technology, the iPad, is an absolute must, especially when it comes to getting them prepared for the F&I office, because most of them have never gone through this experience before, and that's a part of it that there's not a lot of good information for them to research is what's actually going to happen in the F&I office. So by using the iPad presentation, we present all of the products, a brief video on all the products that they're going to be presented with, and before they go into the F&I office, they can spend some time looking at it. We can measure how much time they spend on each one of those products, and then it gives my F&I manager a much better menu to put together that will actually be much better information for that customer.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good perspective, and we're gonna play a video here, and we talk about the dissatisfaction of the F&I process and the paperwork, and creating a better experience, whether it's through your virtual showroom, right, through your website or physical showroom. Let me play this here, and hopefully the audio is gonna work, which I'm sure it will, and we'll see what one millennial is saying.
I think the only challenges that we faced at the dealership was that my husband and I weren't completely knowledgeable about all of the different options for purchasing a car. And the way that they were explained was a little over our heads. So we ended up purchasing things that we didn't necessarily want when we left the dealership. We went over the materials again and realized that we had been overcharged for some crazy things like, paint for our car that we weren't really ever going to use and stuff like that. Sorry, that's my 9-month-old. So I think that we could have been presented with the options a little slower. I think it was all very fast and very rushed in, just in a language that maybe the normal layman wouldn't understand. So if they could take it a little slower and explain it a little more carefully so that people know what they're signing up for, that would be better.
Yep. So that's Maggie. That's one perspective. That wasn't a kid in my conference room here. That was obviously Maggie's child. But the key theme, exactly where Kevin was going, is how do we prepare a younger generation that's familiar with researching on their own to be able to put together their own storyline, and then to have a conversation where they feel it's a part of an interactive experience. And the key here, and Kevin can attest to this, we'll talk to it here in a bit, is ensuring that you, the auto retailer, are in control, right? Ensuring that you're the ones that's setting the tone for that conversation, that you're presenting, whether it's, again, online or in store, the vehicle and the options that, number one, let's talk about profitability and let's talk about efficiency, that you're ensuring the process is clean, that you're going to hit your CSI numbers, but at the same time, you're maximizing the opportunity to make profit in the F&I department because you're educating more effectively. And we've got one more video here, and this is Alex. He's going to talk a bit about this term of transparency, which I know sometimes is a bit voodoo in our industry, but let's talk about that here in a bit.
If there was one thing I would change about the vehicle financing process, it would be to make it even more transparent. Oftentimes, there's a little bit of cloak and dagger and secrecy when it comes to financing that really doesn't need to be there. So if I was to change one thing, make everything very straightforward and stop with the legal jargon. Just give it to me straight so I can understand it easily and make a decision quick.
Yeah, so an interesting point here, and our social media team here has done a great job just talking about this webinar, and we actually had a pretty interesting debate back and forth on Twitter with some folks that the stat that's up here is saying that shoppers say would buy a car more often, if the process was better. And we take a step back and say, do we really think that someone's going to buy a car more often because the 3-4 hour car buying experience is better? Well, again, this is what the stats are telling us. We could argue it. I think at the end of the day, the key theme here is that consumers demand a better experience. They're demanding one that's transparent. And the question is, how do we as an industry react to that? How do we win? How do we win over the millennials in this generation that have a higher level of expectation of what we'll call interactivity? Okay, so when we think about and we talk to consumers about the ideal dealership shopping experience, there were 3 key words that resonated to the top: convenience, customer service, and a positive overall experience. So unfortunately, though, some of the examples that we just talked through, the amount of time it takes to get through the entire process inhibits all 3. So Kevin nailed it beforehand. Like we were talking about the use of technology. I hate to say this, I have an 11-year-old, and I actually just got her a phone. And she's probably the last person in her grade to get one. And maybe that's a regional thing. I'm based here in New York, and but it is pervasive for a younger generation to grow up with and use technology. And we all hear the term showrooming. And the concept that if we're not using technology in our stores to drive the conversation, to create this interactive experience, consumers are going to do it on their own. They're going to dictate the conversation by pulling out their phone. I was at a dealership a couple of weeks ago and just shadowing the F&I department to learn and see their process and understand. And literally a consumer came with their own laptop and fired up the laptop and was actually doing comparative shopping right in front of the F&I manager, saying, "Hey, I'm on a site here and it's showing me X." So how are we going to use technology to enable a process as opposed to replace individuals? And that's the key. It's enablement. How do we do a better job with our staff, with the training of our staff, to use the technology to be more effective to tell our story?
And Jason, if I can jump in right here, the use of the technologies has to be 100%. That's one of the things that we learned when we changed our process and we went to a more technology oriented presentation using the iPad at the sales desk with the F&I managers coming out doing their interview there. And when we first incorporated it into our process, we were probably getting about 60 to 70% usage, but we could tell through our reporting that those that were using it, they had an increase of about $150 lift per deal, and the product index was over 1.0. So every customer was buying at least one product. So we turned it up a little bit, made it a requirement of every F&I manager. We actually changed their pay plans to where if they did not use the iPad menu presentation with the customer at the sales desk, they would only get 50% of their commission. When we did that across the board, we noted we got an almost $400 lift on per deal and now our product index runs a very consistent 1.5. And I've got two F&I people now that are over 2.0, looking at the report today. So whatever you do, I mean, you have to do it 100%. You have to.
Yeah, good perspective. And we remember this 15, 20 years ago when menus first came in the market. It was started predominantly as a compliance solution, right? It was consistently presenting every product, every consumer, every time. And obviously it's evolved into a very effective selling solution. It comes down to training, right? It comes down to that consistency and the management team buying in. And if you work with an aftermarket provider that provides you that training and that guidance, I agree, it's so important. So we'll keep moving here, and we talk about. I want to dive a little bit deeper on the financing experience. We talked a bit about it beforehand, and think about some of the frustrations that surfaced in the time of the F&I office. Well, what can we do to help improve the overall experience, while also driving greater interest in what the F&I office has to deliver? So we're going to listen to Matt here. And Kev, if you don't mind, if you want to put it on mute, I think we're getting some feedback from your phone there. There we go. Thank you. So let's hear what Matt has to say.
I'd say the biggest challenge was after deciding on a car, the dealership then decided to explain all of the different packages that came with financing, which would rattle any customer if they weren't already professionals in the financing world. So what would really help is if some of these aspects were talked about, especially for first-time car buyers, before, or even like a package sent out about financing options before even going to the dealership and looking at the car, so that a customer is understands the aspects that go into financing.
So a thought here, and before I kind of jump on the content, there's some questions that have come in through the GoTo webinar, which is great. So as we go through content, if any of the listeners here, if you want to send in a question, feel free, and we'll go through and we'll answer them towards the end. So it goes back to, I'm going to go to my grandmother as an example. This may sound really funny. So she's 90. 2 years ago, she leased a car, and she literally put the full package together herself. She went to the manufacturer's website. She picked all the details, the add-ons. She found some finance details, and it was interesting. The manufacturer site didn't have any explanation on vehicle service contracts and gap and paintless dent repair and some of the other features that would be sold to her or tried to be sold to her within the F&I department. And I remember her before, she said, I've got the whole deal, and can you come with me? So I went to the dealership with her, and the long and short of the story is she was so comfortable in having an open dialogue with the salesperson about all the specifics when she did her research. But when the F&I manager started talking about vehicle service contracts and other add-on products, she became very intimidated and she shut down, and partly because she didn't know what a VSC was. She didn't understand all these products. And the net of the story here is, right, my 90-year-old grandmother now, no different from a millennial, somebody who wants to learn about their F&I solutions on their own. They want to be self-educated so they can engage in a conversation more effectively. So we can do our job in the automotive industry to focus on selling, and we're still educating, but we're leveraging the data, whether it's through our website or through pre-communications before that consumer comes into the dealership, to have a better interactive experience. Okay. So an interesting stat here, which is interesting. What makes many dealers don't necessarily realize, and I've talked to a lot of dealers about this, though it is providing the ability for consumers to learn about financing insurance options on their own time prior to visiting the dealership actually drives greater interest and likelihood to purchase these products. Exactly the point that we said, and the 63% of all shoppers are saying, they're more likely to purchase these products if they're educated beforehand. We could all we're all consumers, right? We could go to our own experiences and look back when you're better educated before you engage, whether it's a toaster oven or a TV or whatnot, or a vacation, you're more apt to buy deeper, meaning whether it's add-on options or solutions, when you're more comfortable with that buying experience as a whole. And let's talk about the online piece as well. And some of this is obvious based upon the conversations we've had, but the data backs it up that millennials want to learn about F&I products online, whether it's through third-party sites or through other channels as well, the dealership, your dealership's website as well. The reality is, though, right now, not all these options are being offered, right? We're only offering part of the experience online. And the tipping point, and we think about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, not many dealerships had websites. And when they did, it evolved over the last 20 to 15 years. And by that evolution, what I mean is, maybe a dealership had a site with a couple of pictures of the dealership. And then 10 years ago, websites have evolved to have inventory listings. And then about 8 or so years ago, we had the influx of pricing and specials. And 4 or so years ago, we started getting into monthly payments and trade-in valuations and whatnot. And those timings are estimates, but we're seeing a slow evolution in our industry that we are seeing what we expect to be an acceleration driven by millennials to have a better, deeper, richer experience online, to not only go through and see and learn and educate, but actually structuring and making deals through an extension through the site, really through a virtual showroom controlled by the dealership. So again, there's a lot of energy and excitement in the industry, and I'm not talking about our organization of Cox Automotive, really across the industry as a whole, of really trying to understand and create a better online experience. Yeah, some interesting stats just to support that, right? Where 77% of millennials find online paperwork appealing, and 76% are comfortable submitting their financial information online. And go back to that timeline that I just went through 15 years ago. Would any of us ever thought about putting our personal information online? It was on that AOL screeching sound that would get us online. It was a scary thought. You would never do that. And it's natural, right? With a thumbprint on their phone, millennials expect to execute transactions, whether it's at Whole Foods or some other form of retail experience. Information free flows unlike ever before, and that's a critical part that we've got to consider. It's important for a compliance perspective, right? That we're compliant both through our virtual and physical showrooms of how we manage that PII or personal identifiable information. But it's also how are we exposing the process at the same time. So some of the examples we talked about the showroom experience and the buying experience. How are we enhancing the in-store experience? This is if there's kind of one slide I'm going to get your attention on the entire presentation, let it be this, right? Let this drive debate. And what we're seeing, in both anecdotally but through the research that we've collected, is the information suggesting that the use of mobile technology and digital experiences far outperform the traditional experience of completing a deal. It's in line with other generations. This isn't just millennials, but 3/4 of millennials were completely satisfied with the purchase process when it was digital, and far higher than the satisfaction levels with the traditional experience. Again, I use this word of alignment of expectations, of using technology to enable a process. It sounds dramatic, but the day of reckoning of us being able to disrupt ourselves in the industry is so important that we think about and we test. There's a lot of dealerships that I talk to that are side-by-side testing traditional processes like a paper menu, with a more interactive solution. They're testing doing A/B sites on their website about presenting deal structuring versus just straight up marketing information. So part of where we're at in this evolution, this timeline, is being able to present and structure the most optimal deal for millennials, and then to be able, really for all generations as well, and to learn from those experiences, disrupting ourselves through a digital experience. All right, so where does this leave us? Some key bullet points, right? It's never a good PowerPoint without some bullet points here. So think about the key summary points, right? The millennials are buying cars, right? Let's not walk into our GM's office or our 20 group thinking that millennials aren't buying cars. They are. Second point there, they're less satisfied with the traditional dealership experience. Their frustrations are centered around the deal itself, the structuring of that deal, and online or technology experiences drive the education process. They create that interest, and they're creating it at a lot of different levels for the dealer. And some areas for focus, just for you to wrap your arms around. So how do we enable millennials to research F&I prior to the dealership visit? How could you leverage technology to enhance the shopper's in-store experience? How do you create a personal experience, right? How do you make that consumer feel like that it's about them as opposed to one of many? And I know that's tough on a busy Saturday, right? There's lots of ups waiting at the door, waiting for test drives, waiting to speak to a sales representative. How do you create that personalized experience leveraging technology? And when they're ready, enable buyers to complete potentially all or part of the transaction online. Do we see that happening? Absolutely. Do we see it happening for a majority of deals? Not necessarily, not in 2018. But future years out, we're going to continue this evolution in our industry, as I communicated the last 15 to 20 years. We see continued shift and disruption. And the goal is, how do we disrupt from within, as opposed to having others, whether it's consumers or others, disrupting for us? So think about these bottom right questions. If you're thinking about your brainstorming, whether it's your next sales manager meetings, or it's in a 20 group, or you're talking with your general manager, how do you identify the greatest opportunities for you to disrupt yourself and find the greatest opportunity to increase, whether it's improving your PVR or it's increasing overall vehicle sales? Kevin, anything else to add before we open up to Q&A?
No, just one of the things that we all have to remember, and it's this saying's been around for a long time in this business, is time kills deals. And this group wants it now. And they want a very, very seamless process with very little dead time. And that's just one of the things that we've all got to strive, is just how to keep making sure that they do get a exceptional experience.
All right, good stuff. So I know there's some questions flowing in here. Nick, do you want to read them off, or?
Absolutely. Excellent presentation all around. And Kevin, thank you for your dealership perspective on this topic as well. And again, if you have any questions for Jason Berry, our special guest expert from DealerTrack, please use the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And just a quick reminder that we are recording today's session, and so you'll be able to receive a link to the recording so you can review the great data and information that's been shared, as well as share it with other people at your store to discuss how you could modify the strategy at your dealership. And just to start off the Q&A session, Jason, just a quick point of clarity. In the early part of your presentation, you talked about the different credit tiers and how millennials fell into each of the credit tiers. From the DealerTrack data, is that associated with those installment contracts as well as leases? Does that cover all forms of financing?
It does. Yeah, it does cover all forms of financing. Correct. And obviously, we're seeing on the lease side. Obviously, you have fewer subprime deals on the lease side compared to what I'll say traditional financing options. But yeah, it does. Those stats included both lease and finance.
Very good, very good. And another question that's come in early on, and Jason certainly wants you to tackle it, and Kevin, if you could offer your perspective as well, talking about efficiency and speed and delivery, trying to stay within that 90 minutes to 2 hour time frame. How do we balance all of the disclosures and proper explanation that has to be done in order to satisfy the mandates that are dictated by state and federal agencies versus efficiency? Just going through all of those proper disclosures versus speed. How do we tackle that ongoing challenge?
Yeah, maybe I'll take this, and I'd love for Kevin to address that. I assume the CFPB is probably listening. No, I'm joking, but all seriousness, we know that the litany of paperwork, right, or documentations that need to be reviewed, signed, are driven by, you're right, state or federal mandates. And it's a big piece of, we know paperwork itself is a huge dissatisfier in the process, and compliance regulations dictate that. So I don't have you think about a percent, I don't have a necessarily percentage around that, but I would tend to guess it's a large percent of the burden, right, of dissatisfiers. I just use a simple example. You know, you go to buy an iPhone and you tap, you've got two kind of recognitions of, you know, your Verizon carrier or your AT&T carrier, whatever it may be, and then signing of the phone itself, and then you sign, you're off. Right? Very different in signing a retail installment contract and ancillary docs and the buyer's order. So yeah, it's a key influencing power in dissatisfaction. Kevin, any thoughts on that?
Compliance is a topic that is floated around often. We just have to make sure that the process is consistent. We actually videotape every one of our processes. Every close that we have in F&I is videotaped. So that ensures that F&I manager is going to follow our process and make sure that we are compliant. And the going from the iPad presentation, building the menu, making sure that the menu matches all the paperwork is just another step that ensures that we're doing it correctly.
Very good. And to circle back, Jason, again, what was kind of the goal as to complete delivery that would be satisfactory? And Kevin, if you care to share, just what's kind of the objectives at your stores as far as when the delivery process is completed?
Yeah, so the data is showing, you know, it's after 90 minutes the time drops, after 90 minutes satisfaction drops. So the question is, what's the ideal state, right? And do you have to stay under that sub 90 minute to align with? And for me, and I have this conversation with a lot of manufacturers, because manufacturers are obviously very much about CSI. They're about the consumer experience, and the conversations I like to have, it's less about how much time, but it's about use of that time and the quality of that time. And the research that we've done, consumers want to spend more time about the vehicle delivery. They want to spend more time in the test drive and understand the features. So to say, let's get under 90 minutes, go, is, I think there was like 3 articles written about that about 3 years ago. And I think the industry blogs and a lot of the Facebook groups lit that up pretty quick. And my thought process, again, it's about the use of the quality of time, but we have to be cognizant and aware that after 90 minutes, consumers they lose interest and it drops off the cliff. Kevin?
The main thing about their time is, you know, we have to be prepared before they get here. Okay, so if they've already contacted us and we know what vehicle that they're coming to look at, and most of the time we've already agreed on some type of pricing structure. We've often know that what the credit looks like, because we've encouraged them to go ahead and submit credit applications online. So when that customer gets here, it's our goal to have that vehicle out front, clean, ready to go for delivery when they get here. And then we immediately start the process at their new vehicle. Obviously, if there's a trade-in involved, we'll have to go to a trade appraisal. But that's with vAuto, it's very, very simple to get that done quickly as well. But they want to get to that vehicle as quickly as possible. So we have to be prepared for that delivery long before we actually make the sale itself.
Very good, very good. A lot of great questions have come in for our special guests, including Jason Berry, who's the Vice President at DealerTrack, for our special webinar today, Millennials, Sell Them on the Experience. And another question that's come in talking about communicating with the potential customer, and certainly social media is such a popular and heavily used avenue. Just what are your anecdotal thoughts about how millennials use social media, be it Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, what have you, and how can that be a tool to leverage to enhance the experience?
Yeah, so I'm going to give an example outside of our industry. I actually have a very good friend. He has a business that invests in consumer packaged goods, so snacks. And he said there's been a significant evolution of in the snacking industry, specifically in the packaging itself. And what they have invested more time in is the actual packaging itself, because they know how products are circulated and marketed is through the use of social, whether it's through taking pictures, videos, that millennials specifically gravitate towards an experience, and they want to be a part of an experience. And whether you're taking a picture of a package that's very powerful, that influences them amongst their peers. So what in the CPG or consumer package area, consumer packaged goods area, there's a lot of investment in how the product is actually packaged itself to be perceived within this experience. So let's translate that into automotive, right? How does someone go through a test drive, and how do we give them an experience that, I had an interesting innovative dealer. They were talking about doing a video dash cam showing in the test drive the vehicle, how you're driving, showing all the features. That the test drive is very emotional, right? The adrenaline's pumping. The consumer may have missed it. By taking a video of that experience and emailing it to the consumer afterwards, where they may have like, oh, I didn't realize that cool interactive odometer, or the radio had some pretty cool features that I missed. So again, it's how the consumer then takes that information, maybe shares it with their followers on Instagram or Facebook or other platforms.
Excellent, excellent. And if you have a question for our special guests during our webinar today, please use the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And just a reminder that we are recording today's session, so keep watch of your email inbox for a message containing a link to the recording. And gentlemen, another great question that's come in from one of the dealerships who's joined us is talking about expending all this energy to make the experience great, leading into the sale and delivery. And perhaps, Kevin, this is one you could specifically address, is how do stores keep that momentum going to expand on that experience, to keep that customer retained and turn them into one that comes through the service drive and perhaps even buys another vehicle down the road?
The entire dealership has to buy into making sure that the experience that everyone gets is exceptional. So we know that, again, this customer's already made their buying decision, and if we don't screw it up, they're going to do business with us. Okay. And so what we try to do here is we try to make sure that everyone gets the very best that we have. And as far as maintaining that level of energy throughout the dealership, when business, as everyone knows, man, when business is being done and things are moving, those are the greatest days that you have. When sales are rocking and service is rocking, it's pretty easy to stay at that level of performance. But the effort it takes to get started is sometimes where we lack the discipline, and that's for us, it starts with that first contact. It starts with that first email. It starts with that first text, that first phone call, to make sure that we give them the very best that we have every day.
Very good, very good. Closing moments here in our webinar with DealerTrack, Millennials, sell them on the experience. And gentlemen, if we could, closing thoughts here. Kevin, we'll start with you, and then Jason Berry from DealerTrack will let you have the last word. Certainly, as we've discussed during our time together, how unique this specific demographic is, the Millennials. Just what parting wisdom, so to speak, or just your thoughts about this demographic that presents the biggest opportunity for the automotive space, and just anything you'd like to share that would help other dealerships.
Well, as a growing segment and being, as Jason pointed out earlier, one of the largest segments that we're going to deal with, we have to ensure that everything we do is exceptional, and that's that's bleeding over into every customer. The millennial, the one thing that we do know about them, you mentioned a while ago, all the social media. If they have a great experience, they are going to tell everyone immediately. Now, vice versa, if that experience is not up to the level that they expect, they're going to share that information as well. So CSI is not something that's just measured by the manufacturer. This customer is measuring your CSI almost instantly. And if we're doing what we're supposed to do, then we're going to continue to be successful.
Yeah, I think great summary. I think you just nailed it right there. So I wanted to thank everyone. An hour out of your time on a busy Thursday here. I appreciate it. Good luck finishing the summer selling season off strong, everyone. And Nick, thank you for hosting us. I appreciate it. And Kevin, thanks for joining as well.
Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you so much for all the great insights and information. And again, coming to you soon is a recording of our session that you can use this great information to help the business at your store. So for our entire webinar team, I'm Nick Zulovich. Thank you so much for joining us.